Okay, criticisms of Epicureanism. So every philosophy has its strengths and its weaknesses, its criticisms. So let's explore those in Epicureanism. One very interesting one is that some people would argue his philosophy supports a way of life that seems simple, humble, and just boring. Right? So Nietzsche might have said, the declawed lion is moral because it lacks the strength to be victorious and truly virtuous. And some people may argue that Epicurus' way of life is for sheep. They prefer victory, adrenaline rushes, crushing their enemies, like Conan the Barbarian, right? Or maybe you're just the type of person who likes to work 90 plus hours a week on some project and you don't want to live Epicurus' simple lifestyle. So maybe you would reject it for that reason. Let me throw three questions out there, which are somewhat some type of criticism, you could argue. Number one, if God is composed of atoms and dependent on some arrangement of atoms, is it really God in the strongest sense? Number two, will Epicurean philosophy really reduce anxiety in everyone? Doesn't the continued existence of so many religions show that people find comfort in the idea of the supernatural and comfort in the idea of an afterlife, contrary to what Epicurus taught? Question three is a longer one. Some people argue that their belief in God actually makes them happier. It gives them comfort to believe that good will eventually triumph over evil, and inspires them to work hard, make the world a better, more loving place. Think Martin Luther King Jr. It makes them happy to hope that they will see loved ones in the afterlife. It's consistent with their intuition that life is more than the mere collision and arrangement of unconscious atoms in the void. So they feel all of reality is ultimately based on value, not simply the materialistic collision of atoms. And they believe there's something bigger and more definite than the grasping intellect can really understand. This something perhaps can only be experienced, not intellectually known. They believe there's a deeper meaning to life. We're not merely patterns of atoms in the void seeking pleasure. And that's their position, and that's why they would reject Epicureanism. So what do you believe and why? All right, a fifth criticism, right? Problems with hedonism. So is happiness or pleasure really all that matters? You can see my video entitled, Is Happiness All That Matters? Pleasure and happiness are not the only intrinsic values. That's the criticism. Meaning, truth, virtue, reality. Those may also be intrinsic values. Okay, another problem with Epicureanism that we saw earlier in the last video was we should be just because it's just, not because it might bring pleasure and be in my long-term self-interest. So the Stoics, Viktor Frankl, and many religious people disagree with Epicurus on that point, because Epicurus argued, remember, you should be just because it's in your long-term self-interest, it'll bring you pleasure. Right? We can go to religion again for another criticism. So some religious people say his view of religion is superficial and that he doesn't really address monotheism, the stronger forms. He doesn't address the nature of a necessary being or the problem of making a god subject to atoms, the void, and natural laws. He's criticizing polytheistic and local gods at the time. Now he does offer some criticisms. He's attributed as criticizing the idea of an all-good, powerful God with his argument from evil. But for the most part, his idea of the gods and so on is very different than major monotheistic beliefs. Okay, the next criticism is more modern. A modern determinist may be baffled for why he believed that free will is consistent with the idea that everything is ultimately atoms in the void. Now, you can research the swerve, but keep in mind that randomness doesn't really support free will any more than determinism unless you redefine free will in a compatibilist way. So somebody might criticize Epicurus for defending what seems to be an idea of libertarian free will. The next criticism is he seems to have defended psychological egoism when he tries to argue for why friendship is value, or he argues for his social contract theory. And you can see my psychological egoism video for problems with that position. Next criticism, Epicurus disagreed with the skeptics who believed that, we don't really know anything. But he also disagreed with the Platonist who believed that reality is grounded in some other transcendent or immaterial world. Epicurus believed that our senses and our common sense give us knowledge about free will and atoms and more. So if you prefer skepticism or Platonism, you'll have problems with Epicurus on some of these points. And then finally, in the Button documentary, Epicurus on Happiness, Button explains that Epicurus believed we needed 3 things for happiness, friends, freedom, and time for reflection. So I asked students what else they would add, and I get really interesting answers like God, meaning, hobbies, skydiving, drugs, music, and so on. So one way to criticize him is to look at his ingredients for happiness and say that he's missing something, right? Or he added too much. But to conclude, it does seem that we can be mistaken about being happy and about what makes us happy. It does seem that most of us would believe a wise psychologist who said, I've been practicing for 50 years, and I can tell you that there are some common patterns in happy people and some common patterns in unhappy people. There are some things we all need to be truly happy, arguably, right? If that's correct, then perhaps it's good to listen to Epicurus and many wise older people in the world, right? There's much to learn from this type of person whose very presence brings you some tranquility, peace, and the experience of being seen as more than your body, emotions, or current beliefs. Epicurus's classroom was the garden instead of the academy or the lyceum, and that might give you a feel for the type of person he was. I'm also reminded one of the strengths of Epicureanism, in my opinion, is it seems like happiness arises when things drop away more than when things are added. Though there's a little of both, right? So perhaps you could add experiences and processes, not things. So you add experiences and processes like art, music, friends, meditation, silence, nature, therapy, play, dance, rhythmic movement. And you remove things, right, too. Dogmas that cause anxiety, or you explore conscious and subconscious beliefs and attitudes that you picked up at some point in life that cause suffering. So this dropping away is something I think really insightful in Epicurean philosophy. And again, remember, he's a precursor to psychology, therapy, counseling, various forms of those. And that's it. Thank you.